And of course this is a lunch, so I expect you to keep eating, right, while I keep talking, otherwise this isn't going to work. So we need to be out of here by 1 o'clock, so please eat and listen and ask questions as well as we go through this, so that we make this work for you as well as for the folks that are sponsoring this. And in fact, let me just acknowledge the fact that the Chamber and the Environmental Network are doing great work here. Collingwood is way ahead of the curve from most communities on these sustainability topics. So you should be very proud of what's already happening here and the momentum that's being built, not only in the municipality, but also in the business community around this. So one of the things that I normally do talks on, and this is kind of what I do a lot of talks, is what's happening in the business community around this topic of sustainability and why it's happening. And the fact that it looks like some businesses are realizing that this isn't something that sort of they're obligated to do, that this is actually a good thing to do. It's helping their businesses be better businesses. So part of what I want to give you a sense of is what is going on in the business community around this topic, how's it going, and if you were to have a conversation with somebody else in your network of businesses, how would you frame this thing called sustainability as being a good thing as opposed to a must-do kind of thing? So I'm going to go through some slides that may be of use to you. All of these slides will be available to you through the Environmental Network and the Chamber as well, if you'd like to have them. I'll refer to some spreadsheets that help quantify the business value of sustainability strategies to large and small organizations. If you want those, again, they'll be available through those folks. So this is intended to give you some food for thought as well as food that may be helpful to you in conversations that you may have with some of your other folks. So let me start off with a reference to an article that came out in the Harvard Business Review last spring, last May. Some of you may have seen that. And it talked about something which they are framing as the sustainability imperative. And imperative is a pretty strong word to put around sustainability, especially with business people, because it implies that it's something that they need to, must do, should do to be more successful as businesses. So the language around this article was kind of fascinating. They used the term megatrend to describe this shift, this phenomena that's happening in the business community, that smart businesses are saying, oh, okay, I understand this could be good for us, and other businesses are jeopardizing themselves if they don't kind of get on board. And the things that seem to be driving businesses are the concerns of folks like you and me, the public, and governments, not only local governments, but provincial and state governments and federal governments, are starting to exhibit around these issues. And there's a quartet of issues that the authors of this article identified that seem to be coming to the forefront of our thinking and concern about what's happening in the world. So climate change, you'd expect that one. Industrial pollution, probably been around ever since the Industrial Revolution started, so that's again one that you would expect. Food safety is a bit of a newcomer. Food safety, food security, more and more issues around that. Health concerns about the quality of food and also the availability of food in many parts of the world. And also this concern about the depletion of natural resources. Of course, oil and gas and fossil fuels, peak oil and those concerns, but also a lot of the other things that we take for granted. Some of them have to do with food, fish, and so on, and forestry, etc. And it looks like we are kind of running out of some of those things. So those are 4 issues that the authors of the article in the Harvard Business Review said are causing this thing called the sustainability imperative to happen. So is it? Is it really an imperative? Are businesses starting to pay more attention to this than they used to? And it looks like they are. So what I'm going to share with you are 3 slides that have to do with the results of a survey that was published last June. And it was a survey of what chief executive officers, CEOs of very large companies around the world are thinking about sustainability these days and the way in which they're positioning it in their strategic deliberations with their colleagues. So the first one says that there is a significant shift in the way in which they're viewing this thing called sustainability. And what it says is that CEOs agree or strongly agree that this thing called sustainability should be fully embedded in the operations and business strategies of their organization. That's a very strong statement. This is not some marginal do it when you've got an opportunity to do something and you're finished with everything else kind of thing. This is more like a smart strategy. And the interesting thing about the survey is that that question was asked 3 years ago, in 2007. And you'll notice that there's a 24% increase in the percent of CEOs who agree with that statement. That is significant. So although the article in the Harvard Business Review said that something's going on in the last 10 years, frankly it's more like the last 3 to 5 years. A huge, huge change. So what we see here is that CEOs are saying we need to embrace this fully in our operations and our strategies. Our boards need to think about it more, our subsidiaries do, our suppliers do, all of our partners do, and financial analysts should be smarter about the way in which they allow for these sustainability characteristics in their analysis of the value, current and future value of companies as well. So that's the first thing. So they're starting to get this in a very different way. When you get 96% of the CEOs around the world, these 766 that were surveyed, not only in North America, but Europe and other industrialized countries, something's going on. Cross-sector. So, why are they thinking about this way? The interesting thing is on the next slide it says that the stakeholders who are influencing their point of view are traditional mainstream stakeholders. So if your consumers and your employees and governments and communities and regulators think that this is something you should be paying more attention to, you should pay more attention to it. That's a very, very significant point. It looks like the points of view of their important stakeholders are reshaping the points of view of the CEOs. So this is one of those, if they think it's important, it must be important because they're important people kinds of arguments. When you get your consumers and your customers expecting, demanding, looking for characteristics of your products and services that are more aligned with these sustainability things, maybe you should start thinking about that differently. Or if your employees are looking for companies that embrace these kinds of things when they're looking for good companies to work for, maybe you should start thinking about that differently. And if your communities have expectations about how you'll be more proactive, same kind of thing. So again, an increase in most of those importance of stakeholders as a catalyst to the thinking of CEOs. So what do they expect to get from it? Here's the third and last slide around this survey. It's fascinating to see that what they think they're going to get from it is an improvement in their reputation, their brand image, their trust, with who? With who? The consumers. Who else? Their employees. Remember the list on a previous slide? All of those ones I had in blue there. The important stakeholders, consumers, employees, governments, regulators, communities, all of those folks. So they want to have a good reputation with them. Why do they want to have a good reputation with them? Because if they lose that reputation, they are out of business. And that is a reality that's starting to kind of settle in to the bodies of business folks. So, if you can improve your reputation, make more money, grow your revenue, save some money, reduce your costs, and be a talent magnet for your top talent out there that you're trying to attract and keep in your organization, why not? And it turns out that a lot of what's happening with sustainability strategies is they have these wonderful side benefits. It improves the reputation of the company. It helps them make money that they couldn't have made before with goods and services that are being much more in demand now by consumers. And they can save a ton of money and keep their best balance. And in fact, get more productivity from those folks because they get energized working for an organization whose values resonate with their values. You with me on this? So these are the big guys, right? These are the big CEOs from around the world. And what I want you to feel very comfortable about is that this is not just the big guys. It's everybody. This is happening in very, very small organizations, the so-called small and medium-sized sector of the economy. SMEs, small and medium-sized businesses. Familiar with that term? Most of you are probably small and medium-sized enterprises. So small and medium-sized enterprises, for those of you that are not really versed in that, those are usually 500 employees or less. So in Canada, 500 employees or less. In some jurisdictions it's 200, but in Canada, industry, Canada, Stats Canada keep track of 500 employees or less. So here's a skill testing question for you. If we were to take a scroll of all the companies in Canada, what percent of that list do you think have 500 employees or less, according to the Stats Canada? 90? 90? More than that?
Yeah, it's 95.
What would you suggest?
95%, 97.
95 to 7? Okay. Other thoughts? 99.7.
Oh.
99.7. And if you ask how many are 100 or less, 98% of that list. So most companies are flying under the radar screen in terms of the big guys. They're the ones that are surveyed, the big guys. But most of the smaller companies, directly or indirectly, are in the supply chains of those organizations. And these organizations are starting to put pressure on their suppliers to embrace many of these same characteristics that they're being driven by. So there's a ripple effect that happens. So many of those SMEs are finding that when they sell to larger companies, those larger companies are starting to put characteristics of their products and services into the RFPs that look more like sustainability type things. So, something's going on. The interesting thing about this survey, by the way, is it was done at the height of the Depression. And usually in a depression, these environmental things drop right off the radar screen, right? In the history of depressions, environmental stuff, boom, gone. Because people are just trying to survive. And the strange thing is that in this recession, interest in environmental and social activities has gone up. Why? Because they're trying to survive and make more money and save more money. And it looks like these sustainability strategies help do that. That is totally different. In the last 3 or 5 years, this has become a mainstream business issue, and that is brand new in the history of environmental and social movement. Brand new. And a lot of companies are starting to clue into this, and it's really, really exciting. So, I wanted to just give you that overview of how it's going in the business community around these topics these days. Now I want to go into a little bit of what the heck this thing called sustainability is, just so we're all on the same page when we use that phrase, and then give you a sense of how to justify it with organizations that are kind of not sold on the attractiveness of these strategies yet. So let's start with language. Sustainability, big word, but the term sustainable development has been around for a long time. If you have a conversation with someone on sustainable development or sustainability, sooner or later that first definition will probably creep into the conversation. It's been around since, well, as you can see, about 30 years. And it has this intergenerational aspect to it, future as well as present. So you should be comfortable with the so-called Brundtland definition of sustainability. If that's got more words than you can normally keep track of in your head, the one at the bottom is wonderfully simple to remember. It's only got 4 words, right? You got a fighting chance of remembering just 4 words. So we're talking about enough. Enough of what? Everything. For who? Everybody. Actually, all species, but especially everybody. And for a fairly long time, forever. So what we've got here is a wonderfully succinct definition from a societal point of view of what sustainability is all about. Enough for all, forever. The middle definition is not perhaps quite as common, but I like it for one word in there. What do you think that word is? Yeah, flourish. Isn't that an unusual word around sustainability? So if someone were to ask my wife how our marriage is, and she said sustainable, I feel like the word flourish to come in somewhere. It's just got a little more excitement to it, right? So this idea that sustainability is always going to be sort of takeaway, that we're going to have to kind of live in caves and eat bark, is really not attractive. But the idea here is that this could be better. This could be fun. This could be actually good. Not only for us as human beings, but also for businesses. So we're talking about flourishing. We're talking about things being better. We're talking about being better businesses, better communities, better individuals, better families. It's going to be better. And as folks that start to become advocates of these things, you need to be very comfortable with that. This is not a takeaway proposition. This is a let's make it better kind of proposition. And that's the way it's working out for most of us that try to clean up our act around this. Some of you may have heard of an organization called the Natural Step. I'm on the board of the Natural Step in Canada. Some of the folks in the Environmental Network have had a chance to be trained in the Natural Step. One of the nice things about that organization is they distilled down the essence of what it takes to ensure that that enough for all forever kind of thing is going to work. And I call it sort of the operator's manual for the earth. I've just had my third grandchild arrive, and I just kind of wish we could just sort of slip this little one-pager into the crib so that they have a sense of what it's going to take to operate this world in a sustainable way, so that there's going to be something left after they're finished. And I just kind of wish that had happened to me as well. So here's the operator's manual for the planet. The first one is, let's not screw up on taking too much stuff out of the earth, whether it's mined or drilled or whatever, and using it up and starting to increase the concentrations of things in the atmosphere, in the water, in the soil, that could do us some damage. Otherwise, we're going to start poisoning ourselves and drowning our own waste, and that's not good. So try to be careful about that. Second one is about the things that we don't dig up, but the things that we create in laboratories, in chemical companies and so on. We need to be a little careful about some of those things because some of them, if the concentrations get too high, can poison us. Not good. So let's be a little careful with that as well, whether it's oil or oil byproducts that are used in labs or whatever. The third one has to do with the rate at which we are sort of using the carrying capacity of the earth, all of the food sources, all of the forest resources, etc., to the point that nature can't replenish itself. It can't regenerate itself. We're taking away that ability, and sooner or later that's going to catch up with us. So we need to be a little careful about that. And all of those top three have to do with nature. I'm talking about us as human beings. I'm also talking about us as organizations, right? So our footprints. Being careful that we're sensitive to the fact that some of those footprints over time can start to cause a problem if they become too big, individually or collectively. And then the last one is this gnarly issue of social justice, the idea that we need to be a little careful about sharing the spoils in a more equitable way. Otherwise, if this chasm between the haves and the have-nots keeps growing, people are going to get a little bent out of shape about being on the have-not side, and they're going to get a little frantic, a little desperate, a little physical, and that's not good. So what we should be careful about is making sure that we are respectful of all of these things on this little spaceship called Earth that we are all living on. So that's the operator's manual for the planet. Don't screw it up. It's really what it says. Four different ways. Okay, so what we're talking about here is the fundamental ideas of sustainability from the Brundtland definition. It's the future as well as the present, this intergenerational responsibility. It's this idea that this little blue marble doesn't have any umbilical cord going somewhere else in the universe. What we've got is what we've got. It's the carrying capacity that we have to live within. We're doing a terrible job of that right now. So we need to kind of clean up our act on that. The social justice one we talked about. And the summary of those issues around these three legs of the so-called three-legged stool of sustainability. So this metaphor is quite commonly used to acknowledge that we're talking about making sure that we have the wherewithal to enjoy what we want to, good jobs and so on economically, that we are respectful of the environment, and that we also have the social, educational, health infrastructure that allows us to enjoy life. So social, environmental, and economic. So if someone were to ask you very quickly, what do you mean by sustainability? You're talking about the fact that we are doing a better job on all three of these things. Economic, environmental, and social. By the way, economic is in there. So for those of you from businesses, economic is in there. It's not somewhere else. It's within sustainability. So we're talking about a very holistic view of what it's all about so that we do have a good quality of life, that we have genuine wealth as opposed to just economic wealth, and we have genuine progress. In fact, there's an indicator called the GPI, Genuine Progress Indicator, that is getting a little bit of traction in some jurisdictions. There's also a genuine happiness indicator that a little country uses to assess how things are going. Does anyone know what that country is? A country that thinks it's the happiest country on the planet?
Denmark.
Pardon?
Denmark.
It could be Denmark, but they don't actually use a rigorous assessment around that. Denmark or Sweden would be good candidates, but they don't actually do that. So there's a country that does that. Genuine happiness. There's a little country called Bhutan, and Bhutan is sandwiched between China and India in the Himalayas, and they have this metric that they use with all of their citizens. And they're the ones that answer this, and they think they're the happiest country in the world. And if they think they are, right? So what we've got here is a very holistic acknowledgement that when we're talking about progress and wealth and quality of life, we're talking about a rich combination of all of those things. If you wanted to explore that happiness part, there's a great book called The Economics of Happiness by Mark Anielski out of the University of Alberta that teases happiness into these different areas that are being used by Bhutan and other communities to assess how things are going. And of course, economically is important, but the GNP or the GDP is so myopically, hopelessly focused on economic aspects that unfortunately it doesn't include many of these other things, which would be nice. You with me on sustainability then, as to what sustainability is all about? Any questions on the language part? Okay, so this is at a societal level. I just want to do two quick slides to help you understand that communities in Canada are starting to join you folks in some of the things that they are trying to do around sustainability. There's an organization called Corporate Knights that assesses communities on how they're doing on economic aspects of their resilience and security, infrastructure, their ecological integrity, the governance and empowerment, which the way in which citizens are engaged in the political process, and their social well-being. So they have a couple of things around each of those legs, but it's the same basic idea, economic, environmental, and social aspects. And every year they rank cities in Canada on those things. So here's the latest survey. I know this is an eye test for you folks at the back, but they group the big cities, the medium cities, and the small cities around these 5 things that I showed sprinkled around the 3 legs of the stool before. The length of the bar indicates how the city is doing on each of those. So social well-being is this column. Big cities, Toronto is at the top of the list. Medium-sized cities, Vancouver's at the top of the list. In fact, in absolute score, Vancouver is the most sustainable city in Canada, according to the Corporate Knights survey. Then you have smaller cities, Yellowknife, Whitehorse, Saskatoon, Charlottetown, St. John's, and St. John. But yes. So what we have is a ranking. And each of those cities, especially the ones that I've talked to, usually get a little bent out of shape about why they weren't given more credit for some of the things that they were doing. But it's a starter set, right? So if you're being ranked, at least you need to know what they're ranking you on so you can decide whether you want to be a part of this or not. So as a community, you could decide that you wanted to be a part of it, submit your application, they assess it, and then they'll decide what kinds of scores you have. And as I say, the longer the bar, the better you're doing in that particular area. So there are rankings going on the municipal level in Canada. And most municipalities in Canada have something called an Integrated Community Sustainability Plan, ICSP, Integrated Community Sustainability Plan. I don't know if Collingwood has one, do you know? Or the equivalent? Well, we have the equivalent. So the interesting catalyst to that is that the access to infrastructure money in Canada from the feds, the gas tax, you can't get that unless you have an integrated community sustainability plan. And that was brought in when John Godfrey was still in politics in Ottawa. And the first reaction was, you mean our environmental plan? And he said, no, I want your sustainability plan. And I said, well, isn't that the same thing? He said, no, it's not. I said, well, what is it? He said, go figure it out. So they worked with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and they came up with a much more robust set of characteristics that municipalities needed to convince the feds that they were working on it. They had a good plan. So the requirement for this ICSP, Integrated Community Sustainability Plan, was a wonderful prompt for a lot of organizations, municipal organizations in Canada to get their act together on this stuff and engage citizens on their vision and so on, and to try to put together something that could work for the community as well as for their infrastructure applications. So, happening at the municipal level, I can't tell you how much is happening at the municipal level. It is incredible, absolutely incredible. Communities of all sizes in Canada, it is mind-blowing what's going on, all of them. And again, it hasn't backed off at all during the recession. So, at the corporate level, if you were to take a look at the three-legged stool, you would find that there were a wonderful range of titles or labels for the stool. You have different origins for each of these terms, but if someone's talking about sustainability, it's a pretty good bet they're talking about the triple bottom line, or green, or corporate responsibility, or sustainable development, etc., etc. So the equal signs imply that these are synonyms for each other. They're morphing into interchangeable synonyms. Same three legs, slightly different labels because of the business sense. So if you're in business, this is kind of your version of the stool. You get to pick the label. The irony is, if you were trying to convince somebody else that this is a good thing to do, and you lead with any of these terms, you may find that this is sort of a short conversation, because if they haven't heard the term sustainability before, this is a tough word to start with. I mean, sustainability has 6 syllables. Profit has 2. Right? So this sounds a little complicated. So you may want to not use this language. You may want to consider business language to reframe what we call this stuff and just call it asset management. Because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about asset management and being better stewards of the capital that the business is directly or indirectly dependent on. And of course, financial and built or manufactured capital, that's a no-brainer for most business people. But you can't do that unless you have access to natural capital. For your energy, for your materials, for your water, for your food, and so on. Even if you're a bank, even if you're an insurance company, you need access to natural capital. And you can't do any of those things unless you have human capital, which are what? Who are the human capital? Your staff, your employees, right inside the company. And then you have this social capital, which are who? Customers? Who else? The community? Who else?
Your suppliers.
Could be your suppliers as well. So this is a kind of an umbrella term in itself for the relationships you have with all of those stakeholders we talked about before. Those important stakeholders, your community, your regulators, your banks, your insurance companies, your suppliers, your customers. So social capital is making sure that you have a good reputation, a good image with all of those folks, so that you can thrive and do well on those things where the metrics are terrific over there. Not too bad on natural capital, really, really tough here. But if you mess up on this, then nothing else happens. So an acknowledgement that this is a business issue. So notice that the term sustainability is not on this slide. We're talking soup. We're talking the language of business here. We're talking about assets and capital. So this is not an unnatural act for a business. What we're talking about is just being smarter about the way in which you are orchestrating your responsibilities and your dependence on these different things. And building up your natural capital, human capital, social capital, so that you can do better on the triple bottom line. Okay, this is one of the most important slides because it talks about language, and many of us that get excited about this stuff, ramming our language down the throats of the other people who don't get it yet, and we just tick them off. So if we adopt to their language, sometimes it'll get into at least 3 sentences rather than just the first 3 words in the conversation. So being flexible on the terminology that we use sometimes is helpful, and this is business language. Okay, I'm going to skip that. Companies go through various stages as they start to embrace sustainability. Most companies are in stage 3 where they're trying to tap into the savings around energy, water, materials, those kinds of things, eco-efficiencies. Some companies are trying to get to stage 4 where they really bake it into the fabric of their business, but they'll only do that, of course, if it's good for business. Some companies are in stage 5. They actually don't go through the first 4 stages. Stage 5 companies are founded by people that just get it on this, and they don't even call it sustainability. It's just the right way to run a business. They're environmentally and socially responsible, and they just do it. Turns out that they do very well, but it's almost like a side benefit that the business does well. They just are very, very ethical, and they run their business that way. So they're doing it for values-based reasons. These stage 4 companies are doing it for business-based reasons, and the dotted line is disappearing in many cases. There are no companies at stage 4. Some are trying to get there, but there are no companies at stage 4, no publicly owned companies anyway. But the only reason that they're trying to get there is because it's good for business, and let me just give you a quick sense of what that is. By the way, purpose-driven companies, you can probably think of a bunch of them here, but the Body Shop, when Anita Roddick was in charge of it, would be a similar kind of thing. Patagonia with Yvon Chouinard, Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, Husky Injection Molding when Robert Shadd was there, Seventh Generation. There are a number of companies that would fit that kind of mold. They are sort of mission-driven companies. All right, so the way in which companies normally justify trying to get to stage 4 is that they can avoid some risk, step up to some new responsibilities, and benefit from some rewards. And the risks that they're going to try to avoid are the ones that are associated with some of these sustainability-related kinds of storm clouds on the horizon, things that we talked about before, but the big one is climate change and energy crisis. So that can jeopardize their natural capital, that can jeopardize their financial capital, and actually their responsibilities part here could jeopardize their social capital, because those storm clouds are starting to agitate this mob of stakeholders who are starting to besiege the fortress of the corporation and jeopardizing its reputation. And companies need to kind of step up to this, or they will lose their so-called social license to operate. Have you heard that term, social license to operate? So you don't get put out of business by a court of law, you get put out of business by a court of public opinion. Arthur Andersen, you remember, you heard of Arthur Andersen?
Yeah.
You won't find it listed anywhere right now because it went out of business. Why did it go out of business?
Enron.
Right, because it was Enron's auditor accountants, right? And as soon as the bad stuff hit the fan with Enron, there was sort of guilt by association, and people didn't want, no other companies wanted to use the same auditors that Enron had, right? It was kind of bad for their image. So all of a sudden their business dried up. In about 6 months their business dried up. They went out of business. This global company, great people, great methodology, gone. Why? Because they lost their social license to operate. Not only, they weren't put out of business by a court of law, court of public opinion, gone. So, you blow your reputation, you're toast. So what we're talking about here is making darn sure that that is good so that you can continue to operate, that your customers want to do business with. So that's the risk part. And on the rewards part, I just want to reassure you that you can make more money by paying attention to sustainability agenda. You can make more profit if you pay attention to this. I know this because I have gone through the case studies of companies that have embraced this stuff, and it's there. So, how much more money can you make? Well, for a typical small or medium-sized organization, you can make at least 66% more profit than you're making today. Regardless of how much profit you're making today, you can make at least 66% more profit than you're making today, fully costed in the next 3 to 5 years. If you're really aggressive, you can do it sooner than that, but I'm trying to be conservative. That's a lowball number. That's a factored down several times number. If you're a large company, you can make at least 38% more profit than you're making today. Fully costed, 3 to 5 years, no tricks. This is real money, real hard dollars. So, if you were a small or medium-sized enterprise, you would find that you could save money on those 6 areas or improve those 6 areas, and that would generate that 66% more profit. That's where it comes from. By being able to attract, retain, and get more productivity from your employees with little kinds of improvements in each of those areas. Actually, that is so embarrassingly low. I mean, you get employees excited, energized, jazzed about this stuff. They will blow you away with their not working harder, working smarter, their ideas, their innovations to try to help the company in these areas. So I think that's more like 60 as opposed to 6. This is more like 30 to 50 to 70%, because real companies are getting those kinds of savings in the area of eco-efficiencies. The plus sign for this one and this one is a good thing because you're improving revenue, you're improving productivity. The minus signs are ways of saving on each of those other areas. And they don't add mathematically to that because some are top line numbers and some are big percent and small numbers and vice versa. But they end up with a 66% improvement in profit. Isn't that mind-boggling? Isn't it? Staggering. And you'd say, okay, well, this is some other company somewhere else. I wonder what's in it for me. That's where the spreadsheets come in. So there's a starter set for typical companies. This is a typical company, typical SME. But maybe you're not a typical company. So what you do is you just plug in your revenue, your profit, your number of employees, a couple of things in the top sheet, and then play with the parameters. If you think your assumption should be different than what I teased out of the case studies, then that's where the spreadsheets come in that'll be available to you if you want to try this for yourself. I'll give you both sets of spreadsheets for large companies as well as small companies, but probably the SME one is more relevant for most of them. So what I'm trying to help you understand here is that this is not a sacrifice. This is not a kind of swallow hard and do it because it's the right thing to do. This is good stuff. It's not only the right thing to do, it's good for business. And that's a winning combination. So what we're talking about here is the fact that we're getting ready for this new economy. People think that the economy we're going to come out of this recession with is going to be different. Economists are saying these are some of the characteristics that we're going to see in that new economy. It's going to be a much lower carbon economy. Supply chains will be much more local because of trying to reduce the amount of transportation that's associated with them. People will be providing services more than products, leasing rather than selling products, taking them back at the end of their useful life, dematerialization, responsible consumption. Even the idea of not only is it okay, it's actually better to have a no-growth model, which is heresy. But that's getting some traction now. There's a professor at York, Peter Victor, that's written a great book called Managing Without Growth. And it's amazing the way in which that notion is starting to be seriously considered by a lot of economists, and wonderfully creative approaches to company purposes, company ownership, and so on. The creativity that's around this is amazing, and a lot of the creativity is happening in local communities like this. Just people that are making it work, figuring it out. Partnerships that are wonderful. So a lot of the sustainability strategies position you for the new economy, which is good. So what we're talking about here is that sustainability is not only the right thing to do, it's actually smart business to do. Large companies understand that, the CEOs do, and so do smaller companies around the world. Stakeholders are expecting, demanding, wanting to help make that happen, and great opportunity to partner with a whole lot of different folks. And that's the beauty of what the Environmental Network is trying to make available to small businesses in this area. You want some help taking advantage of all these things? They can roll up their sleeves and help you with that. That's what the opportunity here is with what Emma was talking about. Take a dozen businesses here and try it. And see how this can work for you, and work for the community, and work for your colleagues. So exciting stuff, and to have that kind of support here, most people would kill for that. So what we've got are great partnerships to take advantage of, a great opportunity for leadership, personal leadership, organizational leadership, community leadership. The timing is fantastic. So what I've tried to give you a little more confidence about here is that when people talk about this thing called sustainability, it used to be the tree huggers that were kind of associated with that. And now we've got hard-nosed business people talking the same language, but for slightly different reasons. And I don't care. Whatever works, right? Because we just got to collectively clean up our act. And if people are doing it for the right reasons, terrific. And if they're doing it to get rich, it's even better, right? So who cares? As long as we start to get our collective act together and start to figure out how to make this work for everybody. So, food for thought in your power lunch. Thank you very much.